But first, voters don't always recognise leadership when it's present, but they sure can tell when it's absent, like now. Over the weekend, it was reported that focus groups had branded Albanese a beta male. Now, we all know what an alpha male is, but the Oxford Dictionary defines a beta male as a subordinate, a man tending to assume a passive or subservient role in social or professional situations. And today the tag has taken off on Talkback Radio.
Right, so if you were called a beta male, it's not a compliment by any stretch.
Oh, no, God, no. Oh, no. You're regarded as a very weak man.
I'd rather be an alpha male than a beta male, really. It's second class. It's not the top dog spot, really.
Jeez, when you're Prime Minister and you're being labelled that, it's not great, is it?
Not particularly.
Beta male is someone who's passive, almost subservient, and that's not ideal for someone who's the Prime Minister of a country. You need to be a leader, and that's an alpha male, certainly not a beta.
Ouch. Now, the basic problem is that voters have concluded that the Prime Minister seems much more interested in going to sporting events or concerts and overseas trips rather than actually governing the country. And when it comes to governing, whether it's tackling the cost of living crisis or keeping the lights on, getting more firepower into our military, or even just keeping foreign criminals locked up, Albanese is missing in action while his hapless ministers continue to stuff things up. Though perhaps weakest of all was the Prime Minister's admission on Friday that while he might be the leader, he's leader in name only, because he said he's only responsible for what he says and does and not that of his minister, which of course makes a mockery of the term Albanese government, doesn't it, when the PM admits he's not in charge.
Apology there. Is there an apology for him?
Hang on. Ask me about things I've done, and I'll be happy to be accountable for them.
I mean, all right, he's insulted you. Take the high moral ground. Apologise.
Neil.
Yes,
I'm accountable for what I say.
They're your ministers. You're the boss. You apologise to him or not, or you're standing with your ministers?
Neil, I'm accountable for what I say.
Prime.
Now, not being Scott Morrison might have got him into the lodge, but it won't keep him there for very long once voters conclude, as they're starting to, that Anthony Albanese is simply not up to the job. He might have been in the parliament for 25 years, but just being there doesn't make you a leader, especially if your front bench experience has almost exclusively been in transport and infrastructure, where the federal government just basically writes cheques rather than delivers or builds. Indeed, can anyone think of a single big project like the Western Sydney Airport or WestConnex that Anthony Albanese ever drove? As far as I can see, his close relationship with Alan Joyce is about his only ministerial legacy. The PM's real undoing is his inability to make hard decisions. And that seems to be a byproduct of his long history as a left-winger backing nuclear-free zones for the inner city, opposing anything that wasn't a red carpet for illegal migrants, and trying to be greener than the Greens to hang on to his seat. There's little doubt that the government released into the community 145 foreign criminals, including murderers, rapists and pedophiles, because it didn't want to keep them in detention, and it's just hid behind that High Court decision, which was about just one of them, the Rohingya Muslim man we know as NZYQ.
This is a government that has botched it. They have made our community less safe. They have put people out into the community that should be on a plane out of our country. Minister Giles here and Minister O'Neill are completely out of their depth, and the Prime Minister should sack Andrew Giles and sack Claire O'Neill and put ministers who are competent into those roles to clean this mess up, because otherwise we're going to see these people committing offences, further offences against Australian citizens, and nobody wants to see that.
But beyond this detainee issue, we have a look at the latest coming out of the COP28 climate conference in Dubai, and it is instructive. With the Albanese government looking petulant, refusing to endorse a resolution at the conference that nuclear is an important part of getting to net zero and keeping the lights on. Now, how can the government tell us that nuclear power is just what we need for our submarines, but it's the last thing we need, they say, for our civil power supply? How can nuclear reactors be safe and a cost-effective option at sea, but somehow dangerous and prohibitively expensive on land. Now at COP, the government has signed onto a pledge to triple renewable power within just 7 years, but shunned a pledge by 20 countries to triple nuclear power by 2050, including our closest allies. Instead, there was the usual pro-renewables blather from Energy Minister Chris Bowen, even though there's no way the government can deliver on its legislated commitment for 82% renewables by 2030. Not only is that the clear view of energy bosses and business, but it's also the engineering reality, given we're just not installing the 22,000 solar panels needed per day and the 40 large wind turbines needed per month the 2030 demands, let alone building the 10,000 plus kilometres of new transmission lines that are needed to get there, let alone the firming capacity from gas that's also essential. Now, incidentally, this might be the first climate conference, the first COP realist conference, with this year's COP president, Sultan Al Jaber, telling former Irish President Mary Robinson that there is, and I quote, no science, he said, behind the push to phase out fossil fuels to get to net zero.
There is no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5. 1.5 is my North Star. Show me a roadmap for a phase out of fossil fuel that will allow for sustainable socio-economic development, unless you want to take the world back into caves.
We'll get into that a little bit later on, but whether it's keeping the lights on, keeping the community safe from foreign criminals, or just helping people keep the roof over their head and food on the table, the Prime Minister's up against it. And unless he can lift his game and fast, he'll end up a one-term leader of a one-term Labor government.